Good morning, welcome to this Accountability and Performance meeting. I'm Jonathan Shedwards, Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. I'm joined by Temporary Chief Constable Andy Mariner for this morning's meeting. These meetings are designed to help me fulfil my statutory duty to hold the Chief Constable to account for the performance and work of Hertfordshire Constabulary. They're webcast for public transparency. They are on view-only mode. There's no ability for public questions, but we hope members of the public joining find the conversation interesting and useful. This morning our agenda includes stop and search, strip searches of under 18s, use of force and the independent custody visitors annual reports. A bit of a theme around the use of police powers for today's meeting, and we'll cover them in that order. I'm going to start first with stop and search. So there's an annual report done by the scrutiny panel made up of independent members of the public that my office administers, that looks every year at a kind of selection of stop and searches, kind of in addition to the constabulary's own internal governance of stop and search. So we've got that annual report that shows that stop and search increased by 15% over the last year, which is something I welcome, and indeed the positive outcome rate resulting in police action increased as well, which suggests it's being targeted pretty well. But perhaps my first question, Chief, is how's the constabulary ensuring that increase in the use of stop and search is proportionate and being focused on crime reduction? Morning.
Thanks, Commissioner. I guess the first thing I'd like to say is that stop and search is a use of force, which we take really seriously. Although it's a power that our officers will use to prevent crime. They do take it seriously. So the other thing I'm going to kind of lead out with is kind of what you just said there. So we have actually quite an incredible nationally. We're in the top percentage of forces in terms of positive outcome rate, with 40 to 41%. That is really, really unusual, and something that says something about the way that we do intelligence-led searches, which is something I'm also the national lead for stop and search, as you know, and it's something that I'm driving, making sure it's intelligence-led, and so that's really good. And the other thing is where we're doing it. So we're in the right places, kind of using the right powers at the right time, finding things, which is the whole thing about positive outcome rate. We have been using it in ASB hotspots. So I've got some statistics with around over 32,000 hours of patrol. We've had 370 arrests, 654 stop searches. This is to do with hotspots. Quite incredible. With 57 knives seized. I was actually out on patrol 2 weeks ago in Watford, and there was an officer there outside Paddy Power who, on hotspot patrols, funded by the Commissioner's office, had actually stopped and searched someone absolutely appropriately and found a knife that was literally this big. And it's just kind of that reinforcement that we are in the right place, based on intelligence, searching the right people and finding some really significant things. And I think in terms of the assurance, we may come onto it, but we have really robust processes, both at supervisory level all the way through to strategic level, that looks at all of this.
Thank you. And that, just to pick up on that positive outcome rate. So I think previous year it was about 33% nationally, so it's about 40% in Hertfordshire, which is good. But just unpick for me, for the benefit of members of the public watching, what do we mean by a positive outcome rate? What does that include?
Yeah, this gets asked quite a bit actually, in different forums. So when we find something that is a positive outcome, one of the questions I get asked, I took stop and search to the National Ethics Panel the other day, chaired by a bishop, and asked the same question. And I said, actually, sometimes when we're searching, we find something different to what we were looking for. That's still a positive outcome. And it could be it was the right person that was being searched in the right place, but they discarded something. In terms of, I guess it's probably the best description for the positive outcome. We will have found something, and the way that we report it to the Home Office, it will be drugs, stolen property, something like that. Is what we claim it. how we claim it.
Thank you. And that positive outcome rate increased over the last year, as well as the number of stop and searches increasing. So actually that kind of effectiveness of the use of stop and search is going in the right direction, I think.
It is, and one of my biggest worries when Hertfordshire Police, Hertfordshire Constabulary in particular, but nationally, when stop and search increases, there can sometimes be a reduction in find rate, and that's, I think the gap is the quality, the lack of intel, and maybe it's more about doing the action than actually trying to prevent crime and harm. What we're finding in Hertfordshire, and you've pointed out in your question, is that we are searching more people, but we are finding more things. And that comes down to really good daily briefing, officers knowing, the local environment. The example I gave in Watford, the individual was actually known to the officer to be someone that is a drug dealer and sometimes carries weapons. And you think that local knowledge, is exactly why, on an industrial scale, how we've ended up with a positive outcome rate of 40-41%.
Thank you. How does there's obviously a lot of sort of governance and scrutiny that sits behind that quite rightly, in terms of ensuring that officers are using those powers effectively and proportionately and lawfully. How does the constabulary ensure that the records that an officer has to keep that a member of the public who is stop and search is legally entitled to are accurate? And what governance arrangements are in place to ensure all the kind of required information is being captured? And one of the sort of context to that is one of the questions that got raised at the police and crime panels around the high use of the kind of unknown category for a person's sex, which isn't always being answered in those reports.
Yeah.
It looks like.
So I guess in reverse order, those questions of where officers or individuals haven't defined gender, ethnicity, etc., is just something we're working through. I think it comes down to a lack of confidence that some officers have in asking those questions. And that's not just for Hertfordshire, it's the same up and down the country. But the expectations are really clear. So to reassure you, we expect officers, and I mean, I guess you'd kind of expect it whenever I'm out, it happens. I think for whatever reason, and I do put it down to confidence sometimes, officers don't ask. They also sometimes don't describe it themselves, because that's another box for it. And I've forgotten the part of your question now, sorry.
It was just around making sure that all the required information is being captured.
So the process itself is officers, when they do a stop and search, they're expected to activate the body-worn camera, and that then enables the supervisors to then be able to watch the entire encounter, and that is part of the supervisory process. Officers on the street are expected to fill out. They can do it. They can do it in their pocketbooks, but they should be doing it, and they almost always use their electronic devices to record all the information. There's a bit of an issue where there's some bits you can skip, and that's where we lack the some of that. There are some gaps there, but the process is there. They stop the individual. They will use their devices to record all the information that's required. Everything's captured on body-worn video. They should be, as part of Go Wisely, which is the mnemonic, offering people a receipt. They can email it to them, and then that will be supervised later on with the body-worn video being watched and feedback being given.
Thank you. Some of that data that is recorded shows, not unusually nationally, that young people account for a significant proportion of stop and searches. So last year, around 45% were under the age of 24. How does the constabulary ensure that searches involving young people are necessary, proportionate, and there's appropriate safeguarding where necessary?
So everything I said regards adults, and also some disproportionality does also impact young people. So I see where the question's coming from. That we ensure that where young people are concerned, body-worn video is scrutinised. There is also scrutiny panel that exists that looks at things like what grounds were supplied to the individual, whether there was procedural justice, the individual's vulnerability, and whether or not referrals were done, and whether or not they were looked after in the right way. And there is nationally a child-centred policing approach, and that's exactly what we do here, and that's what is then looked for in the scrutiny panels, the supervisory reviews. And the brilliant thing is that there is really good compliance with people using their body-worn cameras, and whether there is a stop and search, and that does happen, that's then something that is also scrutinised. But it kind of goes without saying that, I mean, we have an dedicated under 18 scrutiny panel, obviously with your office as well, so we know that we're accountable not only internally, and individuals know their supervisors and managers will hold them to account, but we know ultimately we've got you holding us to account as well.
Thank you. You touched then around disproportionality. It's a common theme around stop and search, both in terms of, we just talked about the sort of aspect around young people, but also around ethnicity as well. I know the Constabulary's been doing quite a lot to try and reduce that disproportionality, but what's the kind of direction of travel in terms of the action being taken to continue to improve that area?
So you are 4 times more likely to get stopped and searched if you're black than white, and it's about the same whether you're an adult or a child. Just to make it really clear, that's not where we want to be. It is a huge focus in the Constabulary and outside, but it's also not even, across the Constabulary. So there are some. And I've asked this work to be done because you see that on a hyper-local level, things can be quite different. So when you look at East Herts is particularly high, and actually, it's obviously something that we are interested in and addressing. But to highlight for transparency purposes, black subjects, black people in East Herts are 10.8 times more likely to be stopped than white people. That's not where we want to be. There's quite a bit of work that's going on in terms of trying to understand that. I'm not going to make excuses for that. We've got our positive action team now look at every single search involving black people in that area, which includes looking at body-worn video. I mean, the interesting thing is from that perspective, the review that they did on a particular time frame has found that the searches were lawful, justified and proportionate, with actually some good examples of good practice being identified, and the positive outcome rate stayed at 40%. But I don't necessarily think that that's the point that we stop and we say that we're happy, because there's something else that's going on there. Refer back to the previous question you asked me about safeguarding. One of the things we need to ask is there something that we can do with partners to prevent black people, young black people, from being in those positions in the first place? Because if they're being stopped and searched, by definition, they may be vulnerable. So that's the things we're exploring, and we're working alongside partners, including Hertfordshire University, just to try and get under the surface of it.
Thank you. The independent scrutiny panel that looks at stop and search in their review of stop and search through the last year, they graded 79% of the records that they looked at as good or excellent. One of the areas that they most commonly highlighted in terms of areas where they have less confidence is around the kind of clarity and explanation in the records of the kind of justification and the reason why the officer is doing the stop. What's the Constabulary doing to address the areas and themes where the scrutiny panel has less confidence?
So we're genuinely really grateful for the external scrutiny, because I think even when you have the positive action team, who are brilliant, there's still an internal positive action team. So I think the external scrutiny really does help. The way that we approach it with the support of the panel is like a red, amber, green status. So kind of going through the processes I described, body one video, the minimum expectations of what's expected, whether a mnemonic which is kind of explicit so that we adhere to the to PACE Code A, which is the kind of law that sits around stop and search. Where there are no issues identified, that we call it a green, and then it goes through this kind of amber, red. So where there's amber, so there are some issues, so this is specifically relating to the panel, supervisors, so kind of limited issues, supervisors will provide structured feedback and learning. And one of the bits, because it does link into HMIC as well, and some of the questions they will ask us, is what happens after that? So the line manager will sit with the officer, give them the feedback about where it was that the scrutiny panel said that they weren't exactly where they needed to be, and then they will have enhanced scrutiny, so really detailed supervision. They will feel it for the next 6 months just to make sure that, and that will include follow-up watching a body one video just to make sure that the behaviours are actually changing. And then if it's more serious than that, the scrutiny panel has found significant issues, then it will be what we call a red, which is a formal improvement process which is initiated. We call it a My Conversation review, but this is something that is recorded on the officer's personal file, something that will be with them for a significant period of time. So that is, in a policing context, a really serious kind of moment in time. And then following that, a similar kind of process, supervisors will be scrutinising body one video, constant reviews, using the it's basically incredibly formalised, using a proper debrief model. I guess ultimately the consequence of them not improving their behaviour is that they could end up going through the discipline process, and ultimately they could lose their job. And that's how seriously we take stop and search being done properly, but also how seriously we take the feedback from the scrutiny panel. And we kind of hope that from that there is a real clear link between what the scrutiny panel say and then the kind of level of seriousness it's taken within the constabulary.
Thank you. And I guess the other side of that is around how the panel's sort of feedback to officers leads to kind of continuous improvement in terms of, you know, perhaps where best practice is being identified as well. How does that kind of get disseminated back to officers?
So we have a use of force board, and we also have a continuous improvement board. So where there is good practices identified, predominantly it will go to the use of force board where it will be shared. We have every year officers will go to personal safety training where they go through stop and search scenarios. There's another opportunity there. I did it about 3 months or so ago, so it was interesting to kind of watch it. Particularly as a national lead, although I kept that quiet, so it was just interesting to kind of watch it unfold. But what you hear is those stories from where it's gone well and where it hasn't gone well, and they play those out in the scenarios, and that happens. Yeah, every single officer has to go through that every single year. So there are different ways. I think, you know, your question causes me to kind of pause and think there's probably more that we could do with that, and it's something that I'll take away. Because it can't wait for an annual kind of refresher, but there is a systematic process in place.
Thank you. And my understanding there's been some new stop and search cards introduced to give individuals information about their rights after a search, which I think is an important thing in terms of, you know, members of the public understand where there might be, you know, a first interaction with the police officer, perhaps, you know, understand what rights they have following the search. How will the constabulary monitor whether those cards are being consistently used and any impact they have on public confidence? So
I was glad this was mentioned to you, because it is we could call it an innovative piece of practice which is really transparent, but it's really new. And I did, as part of this, ask for some feedback from the QR codes, which I'll come back to in a second, and I haven't got any yet. So that's something that as soon as this meeting's finished, I will continue to chase. But so it is very new, and it was one of those things that, as part of the HMIC work that we're doing, trying to be the very best that we can be, spotted this kind of idea that was basically on a shelf somewhere. So why are we not doing it? So let's do it. So it is very new. But the process, though, and it'll be a good one to follow up on. The process, though, is supervisor reviews, body-worn video, dip sampling. We'll take it to the scrutiny panel, but the actual practicality of it is there is a QR code which enables us to, and that's the bit I wanted to try and get some anecdotes, but that's how new it is. But we will be able to follow up with that. The QR code will allow for feedback directly from the members of public.
Okay. Yeah.
My experience is that stop and search is a use of force, and it is a big deal, but it often comes down to the way it's done. And actually, if we can do it in the right way and we can explain to people why it's happening, then I think we can bring people with us. So I think that's why I loved it when I had the idea. We just need to get moving with it.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to go on then to the next agenda item, which is strip searches of under 18s. And there was a recent report by the Children's Commissioner around this nationally, which I understand there's been some clarity to in terms of what that report said around Hertfordshire, which would be useful to just kind of reflect through the conversation. Can I start by asking how many strip searches involving under 18s took place last year, and perhaps just give some context around what are the potential reasons why those might take place, and perhaps actually, in addition, kind of just define what do we mean by a strip search, because there's kind of slightly different levels of it, as I understand it.
Yeah, of course. So there were 39 strip searches involving children in the kind of financial year 25 to 26. I guess in some respects that's a lot, but it is down from 44 in the previous year. But actually, in kind of the root of the question, the vast majority of time these searches have done, and I'll come on to what they are, is done in custody. Mm-hmm. So these people are already, in a vulnerable position, having been through the custody process. I see on the right side of the desk recently, and actually I did a strip search. It was actually of an adult, but there is a long question set to make sure that kind of understand the level of vulnerability of the individual. And this is exactly the same for young people. There are safeguards in place in terms of the search must happen in front, unless there's like an urgent kind of threats to life type thing, must happen in front of an appropriate adult. And they will be looking for, as in the case of the one that I did, secreted drugs, which is all too common, secreted weapons, and you think this individual is already really vulnerable. The officers have kind of made the decision that the right thing to do in the circumstances is take the unusual step of arresting the child, and then even more so the next step of doing a strip search on a child. You can see why of the thousands and thousands of people that were arrested every year, this drills down to 39 young people. So they will be looking for, and do unfortunately find, weapons and drugs in those searches.
Thank you. And so the Children's Commissioner report on strip search of under 18s recently identified Hertfordshire as an outlier in those numbers, and I think from the work that's been done subsequently that isn't actually the case, and that's been kind of worked through with the Children's Commissioner's office, and there was an issue around what data was being looked at, but perhaps if you could just go through a bit more detail around how the constabularies responded to that and provided assurance around the accuracy of that data.
Yes, of course. So to lead out with, there is no place to hide. We sent the wrong data several years ago, and just because of the way the report comes about through kind of the Freedom of Information Act type approach, and when it happened, which was a couple of years ago, the processes in the constabulary at the time weren't where they needed to be. But actually, since 2023, the way that we capture the data and the way that we check before And this stuff, I know you'd expect this stuff historically to have taken place, but it sadly didn't. But the way now that we are really ruthless with the way that we collect the data, the way that we submit the data, and there's the checks and balances, we're confident in the approach going forward. It was really disappointing to read in the report the number and then actually drill into it, because we all reacted like this is not what we know the situation to be, and you realise it's a historical set of data, and actually the team here, because of the pride that they take in making sure not only the data's right, but actually it represents the good work of the constabulary and how far we've come, actually worked with the commissioners, the Children's Commissioner's office, and they have actually made an addendum to their report just to reflect the actual data, which was lower. And we did have a conversation about kind of whether it is possible to republish the report. It wasn't possible to republish it, but if you were to ask for a copy of the report now, there's an addendum in there just to reflect. And we realised it was a constabulary issue that kind of the data dates back before 2023. So unfortunately, we are where we are with it. And in terms of, there are different types of searches, strip searches, and exposure intimate part searches. And I think the issue with the Children's Commissioner's report is you can search someone in the street if you only remove their jacket, outer coat and gloves. That's different to exposing intimate parts, and we'd conflated the two things in our data return, and that's fundamentally the issue. But we're really clear now. We've kind of decompartmentalised both bits, and that won't happen again.
Thank you. It's useful to understand. Just talk me through then, you've kind of referred to some of the reasons that the strip search decision might be made. Just talk me through a bit more the safeguards in place to protect children and the kind of appropriateness of it, and how that is overseen. You talked around some of the sort of vulnerability often of young people in that situation.
So the exposure intimate parts searches are subject to, I'll go back to the process in a second, but they're subject to internal audit by our police powers team, and then there's scrutiny through to the police powers board, which is chaired at one of the most senior levels. They're also open to independent review through your stop and search scrutiny panel as well. So there's quite a lot of oversight at top level. There is also an expectation that officers will speak to a person of at least the rank of inspector, which is, I know you know, but for other people listening, it's constables predominantly doing these searches. They have a supervisor called a sergeant. They have a boss called an inspector, hold a senior position. It's expected that the officers will seek permission from that inspector before doing an exposure intimate part search. You have audio recording on body-worn video, so for obvious reasons you're not video recording, but you audio record, so there's that safeguard. There's also an expectation that an appropriate adult will be present. When after the fact, it will also be scrutinised, listened to ensure that the grounds were there, and then obviously goes through the other feedback process if it wasn't appropriate, and then also where it was good, obviously they'll get some positive feedback. So I think we will never be complacent with it, but from the training the officers get, they understand the legislation. There's really good supervision management processes in place. It's unusual for an inspector to get involved in decision making like that. What I mean by that is that they only get asked certain questions each day, and it's the stuff that really matters. So for this to be pitched at that level goes to show, kind of nationally where we see that, and then it goes through to the scrutiny, internal audit and external scrutiny, and then scrutiny through you. So there is rightly a terrific amount of focus on it.
Thank you very much for that. That's useful to understand and go through. Thank you. I'm going to move on to use of force. This kind of has a kind of broader reach potentially beyond kind of stop and search aspects that we've been referring to, and again, might be worth just kind of starting with, perhaps give it an explanation for the benefit of members of the public. What do we mean when we talk about a use of force? Because it could be quite a wide range of things, couldn't it?
It really is. And it's interesting how much it has changed for the better over the years. So a practical example, so we were talking a lot about stop and search. So if you think in 25-26, there were 16,441 uses of force from 10,806 incidents, and you kind of think, how can there be more uses of force than there were incidents? But it goes to the point that so with a stop and search, for example, an officer may pull up next to someone who is subject of some really strong intelligence to say that they have a weapon on them. The first use of force will be putting handcuffs on them because they think that they have a knife. Then the second use of force will be to then, alongside a stop and search record, they also do a use of force record. So you think straight away there are two things there, which the public may not even see either of those two things as a use of force, but we do, and that's how we categorise it. Then you have, if an officer we have a number of taser operators that are patrolling all the time. If one of them was to draw the taser and just point it at someone, because we find vast majority of the times that's all we need to do, that is also a use of force, as is the kind of other things that are more in the kind of public mindset of the other tactics that we have, such as our palaver spray. So there's a whole range of different ways, and we encourage people to report rather than not, to be transparent, and then we pick through each of the uses of force to make sure that they're appropriate.
Thank you. And that number of use of force records that you referred to, I think that was an increase on the previous year of about 14%. Do you feel that that's an increase in the number of uses of force, or better recording of those potentially kind of multiple uses of force, or a bit of both potentially?
A bit of both. And what we have seen is an incredible amount of increase of intelligence-led proactivity, the hotspot patrols. I gave the example earlier, but that would have been multiple uses of force. Although no one would have thought there were any force used as such in a traditional sense, that were multiple reports put in about use of force. So absolutely down to the more prevalence of officers out there on the streets patrolling, using their proactive policing powers in the right places, and it's leading to those uses of force. But hopefully I've made the point to people listening that this isn't officers hitting people, although that obviously is something that is that can be justified, but this is more nuanced, intelligence-led, handcuffing people, stopping and searching people.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that clarity is kind of really important, isn't it, in terms of just simply putting handcuffs on someone is a use of force, right through to a taser being discharged, or something that certainly someone sometimes looks at on social media that gets a bit messy in terms of officers kind of on the ground trying to restrain somebody that is potentially at that end that the public might think about. But there's a whole kind of range of things.
It's a complete scale, and actually, while we don't encourage officers to handcuff, we actively discourage officers to handcuff people just as routine. When you have intelligence and information, and officers may have worked, been with this person before and know that they're violent or potentially violent, it can prevent what you've just described. And I'm not saying that when that happens that's wrong, because these things happen in policing, unfortunately, because it's unpredictable. But sometimes that proactive, preventative use of force, putting some handcuffs on people that will be registered as a use of force, will then stop the person becoming, the situation developing.
Thank you. And how does the constabulary assure itself that the use of force is necessary, proportionate and appropriate?
Primarily the way it's done is majority of the time it's been on body-worn video. I'm personally obsessed with it because I think actually it's that level of transparency that that's why we pay for the cameras. Officers are expected to put their cameras on when they go to incidents, all the way through to the point when they get back in the car. It does provide us a brilliant ability to be able to scrutinise the uses of force. There is a check and a balance to make sure that even in custody you see it where the sergeants who run the custody suite will say you need to make sure you do your use of force. We call it a form, but it's online. So there's that level of scrutiny through to supervisors watching the body-worn video, making sure it's proportionate. We also, the use of the Police Powers Board also have a dedicated section where they look at use of force just to make sure that it's appropriate. And there's data that goes there in terms of not just officer assaults, because that is part of the story, but also looking at the use of force forms, the prevalence of certain officers using force, and making sure it's proportionate and necessary, because they are fully accountable.
Thank you. And referred to those use of force forms, and there's often a bit of commentary from the inspectorate around kind of how many are completed compared to the estimate of how many should be. What's the constabulary's current assessment of kind of whether forms are being recorded at this kind of same instance as required by the policy?
It's so tricky, because I have this conversation with people to do with stop and search as well, because some forces find things in 10% of occasions and some find them 50% of occasions, and you do have to, and we do ask ourselves the question, are we accounting for this correctly? Yeah. And so by watching body-worn video, officers being in touch with, the supervisors being in touch with people on the ground, being out visible, looking for the kind of anomalies and nuances in the data, all the different ways that we possibly can, and then also watching the numbers of use of force go up, which the correlation causation thing is, it is tricky. But when you look at the fact that we've had in the best part of 5,000, beg your pardon, it's not 5,000, is it? We've had best part of 2,000 additional use of force records in the last 12 months compared to the previous 12 months. I don't think the county has got more violent, so I think there's a story there about the compliance to with expectations as a result of the additional scrutiny and supervision. We're not directly related to your question, but to provide a bit further reassurance, I was talking to a frontline leaders course yesterday, and they also talk about frontline supervision, scrutiny of this kind of thing, and it's been drilled in with all of our new supervisors coming through, managers courses, and so it's just that constant push to make sure everyone realises they're accountable and that they're checking this stuff. So hopefully not a wafty answer, but it's kind of I think as best we can, and with the numbers going in the direction they are, we're reassured that there's the compliance there. But we will obviously keep an eye on it.
Thank you. And those increases certainly suggest that is going in the right direction. And in fact, the scrutiny panel that looks at this, in the records they scrutinised, they gave 95% of those records an excellent or good grading, which is, I think, encouraging as well in terms of the quality of those records as well. Thank you. I'm going to move on to some points from the Independent Custody Visitors Annual Report. So our ICVs are volunteers who go into the 2 police custody suites in the county and look at how they're operating and speak to detainees and understand how they're being looked after and cared for. Pretty positive report from the last year. So 99% of detainees that the independent custody visitors spoke to were satisfied with their treatment and care in custody. What was the constabulary's response to that report, and how will you ensure that standard is maintained?
Well, there's still 1% to go, you would say, pushing us for perfection. So it kind of helps a lot, because we also have had a previous HMIC inspection where there were some gaps, so we've worked really hard. So actually it's a really good kind of external verification of the progress that we've made. So custody is a really controlled environment. You have to be highly trained to work on the side of the desk where they're kind of running the business from, and that's whether or not you're one of the managers in there or one of the people providing support to detainees. and that's to nationally accredited standards. There are continual professional development twice a year to make sure that they're bang up to date. And we have a number of quality assurance processes in there. Also, the whole place is littered with CCTV, which is kind of the custody version of body-worn video. Although there's body-worn video as well, people have in there, and not to make it all about me, but it's just my recent experience. Bringing someone into custody, body-worn video has been on from the time the individual is arrested all the way through the journey in the car into custody, giving the grounds to the custody officer. And then even when the strip search was done, you just turn the camera around to face it away, so all you hear is audio, and then everything is recorded, and then you've got everything on the cameras as well. So there is a brilliant opportunity to make sure the standards are maintained, and there's a really good audit process. And I was actually dip sampling last night, the actual audit process, checking dates and making sure that we're up to date with everything that we should. And things that were brought out in the HMIC report, like our lack of use of anti-rip suits, which is kind of suicide prevention, making sure we do our cell checks appropriately, is now part of really strict governance. And we are about to, even with the 99% kind of assurance, we're about to do a internal custody inspection, which will come as it won't come as a surprise now because it's on video, but the date of it will be a surprise to the custody teams because we have 2 custody suites and we want to make sure that we test it, so there is a terrific amount, and actually kind of really grateful to independent custody visitors for the work that they do, because it on this occasion it's provided us some level of reassurance but not complacency, but it's all part of making the environment as safe as it possibly can be.
Thank you. And in that 1%, where they were less, where they identified some issues, generally not major issues or concerns, but things around kind of maintenance, cleanliness in the suites, some staffing pressures, access to translation materials, those sorts of things. How are those issues being addressed?
So I guess in a busy custody, I'm not being defensive, I guess, just to paint the picture. In a busy custody suite, there will be something that will happen. Find something. Yeah, and that's not me being disparaging. I'm genuinely grateful. Something like the toilet will just stop working, or the plaster will just crack. But these things, there's a log. I was literally looking at it yesterday. That actually logs these things and tracks the repairs through, and that's just an ongoing kind of maintenance piece of work. Around staffing pressures, one of the things that we're doing in custody at the moment is just reviewing the shift pattern, just to make sure that we've got the coverage that we need, and those affected have been recently made aware of that and just going through that process of consultation, etc. We just want to make sure we've got, as I've said before in other contexts, the right people in the right place at the right times, and also to listen to the workforce, because if they say to independent custody visitors that they are understaffed, that's something that we need to listen to. And my expectation of Nick Litu, the superintendent that runs it, is that forms part of our kind of business intelligence, and it could just be that they're busy, but we really need to understand it. So that 1% is brilliant insight, because if it's 100% surety, you think, I wonder if they missed something. But that 1% is something that we can really grab hold of. And as you can tell, we've got the examples. Toilets not flushing, cracked plaster, the exercise yard wasn't clean enough, and those are just things that we need to just keep pushing.
Thank you. And similar questions as before with Stop and Search. How's the learning and the feedback from independent custody visitors shared with custody staff, both again in terms of best practice and recognition, but also kind of continuous improvement?
So they have, first of all, there's we call them the PACE inspector. So there's an inspector that basically runs the custody suites. If it's something that's quick time, it will go, that the inspector will just grab hold of people and say, this is what you need to know. But more broadly, there is and notwithstanding the continued professional development, but that's every 6 months, there is a kind of custody all users email group and a newsletter that's sent out. That's weekly. which will have and will do identify the issues that have come up and make sure that staff are aware. But custody is a really unique environment, because where we were talking about some of the other areas of business, we have thousands of independent decision makers, otherwise known as police officers, out and about. They do have supervision, and it's good supervision, but it's nowhere near as close as it is in custody. So it's that unique environment where you have line managers who are highly trained and specialised in their area, directly supervising individuals, and then just because that wasn't enough, they also then have an inspector that roams around behind them as well, like a captain of a plane watching everything. So quite reassured that when something is identified, it will be picked up and then reinforced.
That brings us to the end of our agenda for today. It's been a useful conversation. Thank you. They're really important powers that we've been talking about, but actually I think a high degree of assurance that they're being used effectively and are being well scrutinised and improvements being made where possible. So thank you for that. Thank you to members of the public who've joined us. The next APM will be at the end of August, and we'll wrap up there.
Thank you.